Hi, welcome to this week's React Personal Portfolio Series build out. My name's Will, and today I'm going to be taking you guys through the basics of React by showing you how to build out the homepage of the website. Today we're just going to go into some basics of React, and next week we'll go into some more detail and go into some more complicated aspects of the framework. So, before we get started, make sure you have Node set up and working on your computer. Once we do that, we can open up an empty folder in VS Code, just like I have over here, and then we can get started. So today, we're just going to learn the basics of React, and we're going to build out the portfolio homepage. So before I get started, I'm going to go over a bit of a background with an introduction to React. So what React is it's a JavaScript library that we use to create UIs. And it was developed by Facebook in 2013 as sort of an internal tool. And now it's used all across the world and is one of the most powerful and most popular UI frameworks that we use to make websites. So why do we use it? React is really simple and, well, compared to the other frameworks, it can be pretty easy to learn. And it's also pretty performant, and reusable components make it quite easy to use. So what are the key concepts? So React has these components. Like I mentioned, what's a component? A component is basically like a HTML element, except it's a custom component, custom element that we've written ourselves. We also use this JSX syntax, which is like JavaScript, but it lets us write HTML inline, which I'll show you guys in a sec. We also have state and props. And now these are more complicated aspects of React that we'll go into next week. But essentially, state is just the internal state or internal variables which can change over time within our custom components. And props are properties which we pass to the component to tell it what to render, usually from the start. I'll go into that in more detail next week and the week after, but for now, that's just an intro. So, how are we going to start with React? The first thing we want to do is run this npx create React app. Now, this is not a very creative name, obviously, but this is just going to basically give us a template and get us up and running in React pretty quickly. So I'll move over to VS Code and run the first command. So npx create React app, and then the next parameter is essentially the name of the app. Right now we can just use my app. Now this is going to take a minute to run. Okay, now that command's written, we're just going to run cd my app. So this is just changing directory of the terminal. So that we move into the folder over here, this my app folder. Now we're inside of this instead of the parent folder that we were in before. So once we're in there, we're going to run npm start. And then, yeah, over here, our React app should open up. Now this is just a template that they give us, but we're going to go in and delete this in a second. And we're going to build our own from scratch. But before we do that, we're going to move on. So what we're using today is this CSS framework called Tailwind CSS. And now, basically the best way that I can describe this is a bunch of pre-written CSS classes that we can use and just add to our elements in our components, which will make them look a lot nicer by default without having to write the CSS from scratch. So we're just going to go through a few installation tips here. So the first thing we want to do is run this in a new terminal. We're going to run this npm install -d tailwind CSS. Now this will install the package. And then we want to run this npx tailwind CSS init. And now this is going to give us a Tailwind config file over here. So make sure that's in the my app folder. And now we need to add a few things to this. So over here on the slide set, we have these little things which I took from the Tailwind guide for installing with Create React App, which is what we did. And so the first thing we want to do is if you guys navigate to this link here, which is in the slide set, we're going to take all of this, so this little copy button, and we want to just replace our config file with all of this. And then one more thing we need to do is add these Tailwind imports in our source folder in our index.css. So I'm just going to put them at the top, but I think they should work anywhere. So now that we've done that, we should be able to make a start. So before I do that, one thing that I want to reinforce is that the Tailwind docs are very important when you're using Tailwind. So they allow you to look up sort of any of these pre-written classes. So let's just say that I want to add some color to my text. So I'm going to look up color on the website, go to text color, and they have all of these pre-written classes. So there's a lot for text, a lot more than usual. But as you can see here, this paragraph tag has the class of text blue 600, and the text becomes blue. So we have a whole bunch of these colors ranging from 100 to 900, and that basically just is how dark it is. And these colors have just been chosen by Tailwind to pretty much look nice by default. So I'll show you guys a little example of that in a second. Yeah, so now we're going to build out the homepage. So the first thing that I'm going to go and do is show you guys the app.js. So what the app.js is basically what you're seeing here over on the right. Now this is just some pre-written code that React has given us, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete all of this. In fact, I'll delete this as well, and I'm just going to replace it with what we call a React fragment. So this is like a HTML element, but it doesn't actually have a name. And the reason we use that is that when we create a React component, which is what you're seeing here, there needs to be one top level element that is returned by the function. So in general, we're just going to use a fragment at the top level, but this can also be a div or whatever you want to return at the top level, as long as everything else is nested inside of that. So what actually is going on here? So this app is our first example of a component. And where this is rendered is, if we go here into this index.js, we can see this is the entry point to our app. So what is happening here is we have this root element. Now, if you guys remember your JavaScript and a bit of DOM or document object model manipulation, what's happening is this index file is being run as soon as this index.html is loaded. You can see that it is linked in this file. And if we go back to index, what's happening is inside of this root, which is just a div with an ID, which we're getting with an ID of root, we're going to render our React strict mode and then our app. So don't worry about this strict mode, but this app is this component from app.js that was given to us before. So you guys can see that it sort of cascades down, right? So this index.html is the thing that's actually rendered on the browser. And then inside of here, we have the index.js script, which runs this command here, which renders the app component on the inside. And then inside of app, we're going to put our entire React app. So you guys can see that if I want to put, let's say, a H1 in here and run hello world, you can see it pop up on the right here. Cool. So from here, we're going to start building out our homepage. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to create the navbar at the top of the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this public folder, go into source, and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to call it components. Now, you don't have to store your components in here, but as a good convention, I like to put them in here. And then we're going to have a separate folder for our pages as well later. So I'm going to create the navbar component. And if you guys remember from earlier, we're going to use the extension .jsx. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move into this navbar component. And the first thing I want to do is import React from React. Pretty simple, right? And now we want to construct this app component here, except in our navbar. So one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use this arrow functional component syntax. So this is just like convention that I like to do, but we're going to call this navbar, so the same thing as the JSX file. And we're going to create this arrow function, and just like in app, we're going to return this JSX fragment for now. Now we're having some errors over here on the right, but what we're going to do is export default navbar. There we go. And we're just going to head back over to app.js. And now that we've exported it from navbar, we're going to import it. So I already had it sitting here, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to import navbar. Now my linter is picking it up that we can just import it, but we're going to import navbar from components/navbar. And then we can move into the app. We're going to do a self-closing tag for our navbar component. And now this is rendering. We just need to do a test here. There we go. Our navbar is rendering. So now we can start building it out. What I'm going to start with is an outer container. So we could just replace this JSX fragment with a div, or we could put the div inside. It doesn't really matter. What I'm going to do is replace the JSX fragment. So as long as there's a top level component, it doesn't matter what it is. So this is just our container for our navbar. And what I'm going to do is I want to make it yellow. So I'm going to use the class name property. This is different to the class like it is in normal HTML. That's just because JavaScript has class as a reserved keyword. So we use class name in React. And I'm going to start using Tailwind. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to change the color of the background. So how we do this is we have this BG, and then after that specified keyword, we have yellow 400. So 400 is just like the hue of the yellow, and this will give us a yellow background once we add some content. So I'm going to start with a H1, it says hello world, and there we go. We can see that this has a yellow background. Pretty cool, right? So what I'm going to do next is add a little bit of padding to it. So we can do that with the P. And as you can see, there's all of these pre-built CSS classes. So we could do P8, and this will add a bit more padding, but I'm just going to stick with 4 for now. Now I think I kind of want to add like a border to the bottom of my navbar. So I'm going to add a border on the bottom, so border B, and then 2, which is the width. This could be 4, this could be 8, this could be 16, this could be 1. Okay, it can't be 16, but we're going to make it 2. Now I want to change the color. So I'm just going to make this border black, because right now it's this weird gray color. And there we go. We've got a border on the bottom of our navbar. So inside here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another container. And now the reason I'm going to do this is so that we can align our items nicely. And inside here, I'm going to add the class name of text large, because I want the text in the navbar to be nice and large. And I'm thinking we're going to go font semi-bold, just so that it stands out a bit. So now I'm going to move back into this top level container. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the properties mx auto, flex, justify between, and items center. Now what this is going to do, if we scroll back over, is these three, adding the flexbox property with a justify of space between, as you can see when you hover over it if you have the linter, and align items of center. So you guys will see in a second how this is going to work. But essentially, we're going to add some buttons. Now this one, I want it to be like a bit of a logo. So add a button, my portfolio. There we go. It's showing up on the left here. Looks pretty good. And I'm going to add another div below this. And so now you can see, once we add something in here, let's go the experience page. Because we have this justify space between, it puts all of the space in between the items. And now experience is over on the right, and this my portfolio logo is on the left. So I'm going to add another button here, and this eventually is going to become a link to our contact page. So now we have our buttons set up. What I'm going to do is, the spacing here on these buttons is not quite right, I don't think. So let's add some padding. So I'm going to add padding just on the left and right with the px property. And I'm going to add that to both of them. So I'll just copy and paste this, and now you can see that they're laid out quite nicely. So the next thing that I'm going to do here on the nav is I'm going to add a bit of a change when we hover over it. So what you can do is you can have the hover and then this colon and any property that you want. So whenever we hover the mouse over this button, anything we put in here is going to change. Now what I want to do is just to have a little bit of interactivity. I'm going to change the text color to white. And now you can see when I hover over experience. Okay, now I'm going to add a little button underneath. And this is just going to be a bit of a contact button, I suppose. So we could say, get in touch. Cool. So as you can see, when we hover over it, looks like it's a button, it's clickable, that's good. But I think we need to add a bit of styling to this. So class name again, I think we'll add a border to it. So we'll go border, cool. Let's make that border black, because I think right now it's gray. Yeah, that looks good. I think we need a bit of padding on the inside because this border is a bit too close. So let's some padding on the X, px4, and then a bit of padding on the Y. So the top and bottom, maybe a little bit less, so px2. Now I think we're going to make this rounded. So we could go rounded. I think I want to make this like really circular. So rounded full. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now, I think I want to add a bit more interactivity to this. So like I did before, on hover, we're going to, so some recommended readings that I think you guys should check out. Roadmap.sh. This has a great roadmap for web dev in general. The Odin project's pretty good for learning React. JavaScript Mastery is always great for some example projects that you guys can do. And then Code Academy, as always. So we